Socho, Zhuanqi? Might be cousin.
Hello, I think.
Welcome everyone to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host, and this is our segment, Defragmenting Droids, our look at the wonderful world of droids in the Star Wars universe. This month we're focusing on droids and the deeper purpose and meaning that they have. Today we are joined by Swara, and help me pronounce your last name.
It's okay. Everyone mispronounces it. It's pronounced Salih, but I've gone Salih, I've gone Saleh, I've gone Salih. Found to be mispronounced. It's fine.
I'm so sorry. I really do try.
Please don't apologize.
Welcome, Swara. Thank you for coming on the show. We're going to talk about a really fascinating topic today, which is droid manumission and droid right.
Yay.
But before we get into that, I want people to know all the wonderful things that you do. So if you could do a little elevator pitch for yourself, that would be really great. And then we can talk about mutual love of Star Wars and what's going on in the universe right now. And then we can dig into this droid topic.
I am the co-host of Beltway Banthas, the Star Wars and Politics podcast, which covers everything in the intersection between those two topics. And I'm also a co-host of the Flash podcast, which covers every episode of the Flash TV series. I'm also one of the founders and organizers of hashtag SWRepMatters, which calls for increased representation and diversity in the Star Wars universe in front of and behind the camera.
Thank you for coming. And as you can see from your background, your experience with politics, with, Star Wars itself, as well as representation, has a really good perspective on droids and like what they're trying to do in canon and what that could maybe mean out of canon for us. First and foremost, we both love Star Wars, and we've had this really great new show that started. It has a lot of droids in it, so that does actually tie into this topic. We have a brand new droid. We have BB-8. We have lots of droid labor in the background of the Colossus in the show Star Wars Resistance. Did you want to talk a little bit about the show and kind of what it's been doing?
Yeah. So I've had the best feeling about this show since it was announced, and the first episode that I saw, I'm watching it on the Amazon service. I'm watching one episode at a time. Watch the first two-parter. I absolutely fell in love with it. It did not disappoint. And as you mentioned, there are so many droids in this series. There are also a lot of aliens in the background and in front, and it's also very racially diverse with the main character Kaz and Poe, and I think like Taro, I think that's her name. Like, I think she's a woman of color.
Tora?
Maybe Latinx. Yeah, I'm not sure what her voice actress is, but like, still, like that visual representation, having another brown character on screen, that's awesome.
And Tam.
But yeah,
Yeager.
sorry, Susie McGrath. Yeah, Tam. Yeah, exactly. I love her, and and obviously Yeager, another black man in Star Wars. So this show is diverse on so many fronts, in front of and behind the camera, with the voice actors who are people of color voicing characters of color, which has been an issue in animation before, but this is rectifying that in a really great way. And I just want to say I love Kaz so much. Like, he's one of my favorite characters already. I feel so much in common with him. But like, as this episode is about droids, yes, there were so many droids all over the place, and we only really got like a brief introduction to each of them, but I feel as though the show's going to incorporate them in a really great way, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and like what's really fascinating about in the Star Wars universe is that I would say the focus on what they mean and what they represent has definitely changed since the Disney acquisition. Like way back when,
right,
in the original world, when George was kind of crafting his story, he based R2-D2 and C-3PO very much on the two servant droids in the Kurosawa film Hidden Fortress. So these two servants that would go around and almost be like running commentary and our eyes within what was happening within the film and the narrative. And so like the two droids that we meet first in A New Hope, C-3PO and R2-D2, very much do align with those two characters within Hidden Fortress. And that's interesting. But then he has gone on in interviews and long term to say that droids are appliances in Star Wars, and like, why would you ever feel bad for a toaster? I think that's actually like a direct quote from him, that like he didn't even feel bad.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, in my interview with Vanessa Marshall of Star Wars Rebels, she actually said that Dave Filoni views droids as like cats and dogs.
Interesting. Because like I know that he puts a lot of, I mean, we got confirmation that he voiced Chopper. So I
he
feel
views
like
him as the angry cat.
Yeah. No, but I remember in season 4 of Rebels, they were really hammering down on the notion that Chopper is a PTSD ridden war veteran. And I know that Dave voiced the character. Yeah, like I said, voiced the character as well. So, I mean, I understand the cats and dogs thing. At least he put some more sort of anima, like a sort of spiritual sense into the droids than George may have necessarily done. But I also could, the way the droids have come off in the show to me have been very humanistic.
Yeah, and that's purposeful. They purposefully make R2-D2 and C-3PO humanistic. With the sound design, R2-D2 has like his voice in it, in his beeps,
right,
and how he makes his noises. So it was to make him more humanistic. It was to make him more animated, like you just said, to give him a soul behind the beeps, not so it was just a machine making these vocal expressions. And of course, Anthony Daniels playing C-3PO has made C-3PO animated, even though he has no physical animation on his face.
Right.
So it's an interesting world that they created, and then in universe and out of universe, they straight up deny that droids are anything. Pre-Disney acquisition, I'm going to say.
Right. It definitely seems as though there's been this evolution, as you've talked about. And listen, I love Star Wars with all my heart, but is nothing if not inconsistent. So
yeah.
I feel like the idea of like what the droids are and how they fit into the universe and all of that, it's very subjective from both the creators and the characters, honestly. I think you see with Anakin, Luke, and Rey, consistent thread of treating the droids very much like human beings, like sentient beings. And you see other characters, like, for example, Han Solo, treat them more like cats and dogs, and maybe he doesn't have much affection for them, even if they're cute, cuddly cats and dogs. But yeah, it's interesting, the human perspective towards droid.
Yeah, it is. In Daniel Jose Older's book, Last Shot, about Han Solo and Lando and their last adventure, at the start of the book, we have Han kind of dealing with baby Ben and, the troubles of being domestic. And he ends up having a fight with a droid in his house, his cook droid. And Mon Mothma makes a point of saying, Han, droids serve their function and deserve your respect. They are serving the Republic just like you.
Right. Yeah, I remember that part in Last Shot. And yeah, Mon, for some reason in fandom, she's been getting like a lot of flack here and there. Well, I do know reasons why. Like some of my friends like really don't like Mon Mothma, but I've always really liked her. And I feel like she always comes at things from a genuine place of affection and respect for all sentient beings, including droids. And
it was a very good ad, I think, because it gave us an in-universe person who recognized droids as something that served a function. And I very much had sort of just in my personal life, this, I don't know, maybe it's like a schema or something like that. You should be judged by how you treat the lowest person in your, bubble or your world, right? So
you got that from Harry Potter, didn't you?
A little bit. Really, but no, I've thought about it for a really long time, because I used to be a secretary, and some people treated me long ago, like when I was still in school, I part-time job, secretary, and judging people by how you treat the lowest person really does put a good framework on whether they understand and appreciate all of the different people that go into making a society work.
Yeah. Exactly. It's
because if the CEO or like a VP, treats you badly, then that's
right.
A person that doesn't appreciate all the people that have to work every day to make society work. But yeah, to your Harry Potter point, do you want to explain that one?
Yeah, that was in book 5, with Sirius Black talking about, or was it? Yeah, I think it was book 5, just talking about one of the characters they were encountering, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The ironic thing in that book is that Sirius was treating his
Creature
house.
terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that's the ironic thing. So it's funny how, there's almost like a sense of performatism, almost a sense of performative wokeness to that moment with Sirius, where he's like, yeah, I believe in this ideal, like, look at how woke I am on
Yeah.
this issue, but putting it into practice, he's really like, he let his own very personal feelings about the household, Grimmauld Place, and Creature as a reflection of the mother that he hated interfere with that notion that he was espousing. And I have a feeling like we may see the same, like in Star Wars here and there. Like, I can't think of any specific examples, but I think
Obi-Wan
like
Kenobi.
the canon is so large right now. Oh, interesting. With which droid exactly?
R2D2.
Like in terms of like him not recognizing him in A New Hope?
No. This is back in the prequels and how he treated R2D2 in Revenge of the Sith. Like, at one point, they need R2D2 to do something, and Anakin stops him and says, "No rusty circuit jokes," or something like that. Like,
oh, I see.
But he's always treated droids, especially in Clone Wars, in not a very nice way. He is honestly it is so dichotomous with how he is viewed as a regular character that he just like, he does not treat droids very nicely at all.
Right. Man, that's really interesting. I haven't noticed that much. And one of my favorite characters, so maybe I look at him through a rose-colored lens. But that is interesting. And Bill has like the best friendship with R2 as we see in the Clone Wars. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to this like I don't know, this wokeness idea that you've brought with Sirius Black, because I think that like this is something that we might see kind of in universe in Star Wars a little bit more, which is this idea that like, yes, I should treat droids respectfully, but then when you actually see it in practice, the world itself, like their experiences with it, they'll probably still use restraining bolts on a droid, right? Like they'll still,
exactly,
like because there is a separation from people's experiences and what they theoretically know. It's like, yes, I'm an environmentalist, but you never recycle, like that sort of idea, that, and I'm not trying to compare those directly, but just like the idea that you can espouse to something in concept, but it's a very different thing to live it in your real life and to recognize where your own privilege and your own, I'm not thinking of the right words, but your own life applies like to your own biases. Ideals. Yes, your own biases and your own life applies to those morals and concepts that you have verbally plugged into. But it's a very different thing to live the life, right? And I think that that's really interesting. Like, I hadn't really thought about Sirius Black in that way, and that's great. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks. Thank you for giving me an outlet to talk about that. I need to talk about Harry Potter in a constructive way. I haven't done so for so long. I wonder if we can like also talk about droids who ignore their programming. I think the most prime example of this is R2D2, whom we see from the start. Like, even with a restraining bolt, he still very much has a mind of his own. He's still is very rebellious and gets Luke almost potentially into a lot of trouble. And I'm wondering if the reason he's so rebellious is because of his decades worth of programming, which has essentially allowed him to have a mind of his own. I'm wondering if that might be the key to why some droids are more in line with their programming and others are rebellious, like R2D2. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on R2D2 specifically and Astromechs. In canon, it does say several times that Astromechs are rebellious. They have a way of, reprogramming themselves. So like L3 having the brain of an Astromech, but then like has basically put herself together. I think that it's a combination, and if we were to view this from a psychological perspective, that the more experiences that you have, the more programming and opportunity to build new circuits and new pathways within those circuits on how to handle new situations allows droids to, exist and come up with alternative ways of dealing with restraining bolts. And this comes into play as quite a cruel activity if we think about droids that are being wiped, like C-3PO in the end of Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
Like, if experiences create aware, self-functional, droids that are able to choose for themselves, then one of the cruelest things that you can do to a droid is wipe them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know how much I love Bail Organa, but that moment, it was understandable. They needed to protect Luke and Leia's identity, and 3PO is a bit of a blabbermouth, as we all know. So, but at the same time, you got to feel sorry for him. And yeah, this is, again, a sentient being who is having his life essentially taken away from him.
Yeah, it's like forced amnesia.
At the same time, he's not an alive. Yes, exactly. At the same time, he's not an alive being. So, but it goes into this question, this overall question that is addressed in Solo of droid rights.
Yeah, and what is a droid?
They are artificial beings. Right. What is a droid? And are they only bound to the masters that created them? But on the flip side, are we as organics only bound to our parents who essentially created us? The answer to that is clearly no.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really on this question of organic versus inorganic. There's no way to, or I don't know, it's like, it depends on your point of view. It's so subjective how we want to treat droids, how we want to think of them generally, and how we want to give them these rights.
Yeah.
Again, the answer is subjective, up to us organic.
Yeah, it's a struggle because there's history with droids. We don't know how long they've been around. We don't have in-canon answers for how long droids have existed and how this symbiotic relationship with organics has existed. But we do have several outcomes of that. It is it is recommended you wipe your droid regularly so they don't develop personality kinks. Even if you do, they can still have personality that stays with them. Like C-3PO still has kind of like these quirks and things like that. And eventually, like in one of the cartoons, I don't know if it is canon, but he gets his memories back and he tells stories, about what happened. I think it's like Droid Tales or one of those. We have the existence of restraining bolts, which locks a droid to their base programming, which means they cannot not obey their master. They have to obey the commands by which their base programming is based on. So it's like, if a master gives you a direct order, you must obey it. What I think happens with R2-D2 in A New Hope is that he has another master that has already given him a command. Leia has already said, you need to go find Obi-Wan.
He found a loophole, basically.
There's a loophole, in his programming. And he's old enough to know how to manipulate his own. It's almost like he lawyered his own logic.
Yes. My boy R2. Yes.
But like, why does that exist? We've never had a story about why these things exist. Was there a massive droid rebellion where droids went and killed everybody? like why does a restraining bolt need to exist? That to me is like, so, and where is the societal fear that Jawas, who are, not very powerful, feel like they need to put restraining bolts on droids all the time? Like, that's just standard practice. They just pop that thing right on R2 and C-3PO.
In my day job, I do a lot of coding. I do a lot of coding with Python. And all coding is based on a series of layers of commands that if you have this thing happen, you must have this sort of reaction.
It's like if then this statement.
Yes, exactly. If this, then if X, then Y, essentially. So coding in our various applications, it takes hundreds or thousands or millions, maybe even billions of lines of code to create these commands. And in a lot of ways, the human brain works the same way in our reactions to the stimulus from the outside world and how we react to it. This is essentially the same thing with droids. I think, especially with droids that have been around for decades, that have accumulated so much knowledge, have accumulated so much experience generally. And like, we have the restraining bolt so that they're only doing their base practices, the base things they were programmed for, base tasks, so that they can't take any of this extraneous stimuli that does not have to do with their specific tasks or what their specific master wants them to do. And it keeps them tight roped into their daily tasks that their master wants them to do. It's something that I think whenever, and, you know, it's funny because like we're dealing with this in our own technological era right now, that we don't know all of the various applications. We don't know the exact impact of technology today, and we don't know how technology is going to impact society. We don't know, for example, how social media, websites, the internet generally has affected society. We always run the distance first before setting the finish line. I think we've had the same thing with droids in Star Wars. I think that on the various planets scattered throughout the galaxy, sentient beings were so eager and willing to create this new amazing technology. These droids, you could give them so much assistance with such a huge variety of tasks. They didn't consider the pitfalls and how essentially artificial intelligence could act on its own. And thus they had to create more technologies to deal with that, such as the restraining. We see this in our own world with, again, like social media, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, like various forms of social media that we didn't fully grasp what the societal impact would be, especially with Facebook. And we're seeing the same thing with droids. So there's a parallel there.
It's like you've tried to put a fix on without really fixing the whole problem, you know, or really understanding what the whole problem is. It's like a patch just for this one situation, which is this one, you know, droid. And what I find fascinating is in Star Wars, we have in canon, in movie examples, the droids are droid brains are the computers of Star Wars now. So like Cloud City Central Computing System has a nice conversation with R2. L3 being uploaded into being the Nava computer for the Falcon. Like we now know that there's 3 droid brains in the Falcon. You know, like anything. And now I'm like, what was the computer of the Death Star like? Or was there multiple computers and multiple droids, like brains that were behind the Death Star? And we don't know anything about that.
We need to get another certain point of view story about the brain of the Death Star.
The brain of the Death Star, yeah.
Yes. Because like, what is the Death Star but essentially one big well, I guess not really, because it's not really acting on its own. It's one big huge ship.
Yeah.
Really.
But there could be one that was in charge of like navigation, one that was in charge of the actual Death Star like weapon, right? There could be lots, and that's something that people don't think about on a regular basis. And then like the focus has changed to these stories of droid rights with Solo and L3 and Manumission. They've brought it out in side canon material. Like there's a droid in the visual dictionary of Rogue One that is manumated, quote unquote, and it's just a one-liner talking about this droid on Jeddah. And it was the first time that I'd seen, I think, in new canon, the words manumitted and used for a droid, like in the Disney canon.
Interesting.
I was really excited. His name is Cone, or Kone, or something like that, or 3. He is seeking spirituality on Jeddah because he's been manumated. And he wants to understand spirituality.
That is fascinating. A droid who's trying to achieve spirituality on Jeddah. How did I not hear about this before? I guess, like, yeah, it makes sense, like a droid wanting to achieve a higher level of understanding about the universe and their own potential place. I mean, honestly, I feel like the best example we've seen of this is in Futurama with Bender.
Yeah.
Like we've seen him try, yeah, right. Like we've seen him multiple times try to achieve like, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of my existence? Again, those layers and layers and layers of programming, which are essentially on the same level as a human brain, if only slightly lower. That is wow. I mean,
and we get a little bit of that with L3 with Last Shot.
Yes.
Signaling device, the kind of bomb or whatever in universe for all the droids to turn on everybody. That's a spoiler, sorry. But like there's this thing and it understands what it is and its place, and so L3 procreates with it. Like there are these fascinating stories and it feels like not enough people are paying attention to them.
Yeah, like people don't pay enough attention. There's so much rich storytelling potential here. I really hope that in more TV shows, maybe we can have a movie about this. Maybe we can have a series that's just about droids. I think that would be really cool. There's so many questions at play here, which enter into a real moral quandary for Star Wars. And, you know, like, even though, like, we're getting all this in the Disney era and we have this explored in Legends a lot as well, I really hope that they take advantage of this. I hope that there is some sort of story about reckoning of droids' rights in Star Wars. And it would be fascinating for each of the characters to explore their own biases towards droids. And you can have characters like Rey, who has been acquainted very much with droids all over life, like loves droids, she loves BB-8. Just side note, my favorite human droid relationship in Star Wars is Rey and BB-8 in The Force Awakens. I love it so much. It's so good, so good. And we can have that contrasted against characters like maybe Finn or Finn's the only character I can think of who
Han has a pretty negative relationship with like a C-3PO especially.
Right. I was just thinking during current sequel trilogy time.
Sequel trilogy times, yeah. You know, and I don't know that we've dealt with anyone that has treated droids negatively, because I think that Finn, because of his respect for Poe, respects BB-8. Like, I don't know that we've had a sequel trilogy moment. I know that we've had different people treating L3 differently. We definitely got some different play of how people treated K2SO. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that they've gotten there yet. And there's still lots of space for storytelling in what this means, you know?
Yeah, we didn't really get like that full exploration yet. And I think we just need to do more on that front.
Yeah, I would love if we could get the actual story behind like some sort of droid revolt where people were like, oh, no, we got to wipe our droids and we need restraining bolts. Like, I would like to humanize droids going forward. Something set thousands of years ago. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you look at Knights of the Old Republic and HK-47, and part of the reason he was such a popular character is because, you know, like he was, I mean, even though like he was kind of an insane killer droid, you could still like really love him and like what, you know, he was bringing to the table. So yeah, like that was really great.
His like statement, it was very enjoyable, you know, like how he spoke, what he said was shocking, right? Very much in line with what K2SO is, but like he's not as I would say murderous as HK-47 was.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the thing about K2SO is like, you know, he was like programmed as a like imperial like sort of killer droid, but yeah, like he's still like, there's still like a really human element to him that Alan Tudyk brought in his motion capture performance. And like, you know, he was cynical throughout most of the film, but towards the end, like especially that moment when Jin gives him the blaster and he says,
I love that.
Jin Erso, your behavior is it's such a good moment. Your behavior is continually unexpected. And you can see like the real affection like coming from his photoreceptor eyes. And it's just such a sweet moment.
I love droids so much, Swara. Like, and they open up these storytelling elements. So in I think it was Art of Solo book, there's actually a one-liner about L3 that she's actually based on a droid activist concept that George actually had, and they just like pulled it out of the archives and they based her character on this concept. I'm not happy with how L3's story ended up playing out, but it seems like George even was on this idea that these stories needed to be built on, even when he was still in charge of the franchise. And what is really interesting to me is like they had this great opportunity with L3 in Solo, and to me it played it off as a joke. That makes me really sad.
Right. Yeah.
I loved Last Shot and how that played out with Daniel Jose Older, but like
right.
Solo, like, yeah, I'm gonna be quiet now. I'm so sad.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was really sad. And I was actually just at New York Comic Con, and the writer of the Solo novel, you got to speak with her a bit, like about how she wanted to give much more of L3's perspective in Solo to make it seem as though she wasn't simply a slave beholden to the Falcon. And I think the impression I generally got listening to her on the panel and speaking afterwards was that it's like the story itself like put her into this difficult position that wasn't going to make anyone happy with the way L3's story was resolved. And that's sad, honestly, that this amazing real droid empowerment character got such a crummy ending. And full disclosure, I didn't like Solo much as a film. I have friends that love it, and I like, full respect, like, love what you love. I'm glad for that. But L3's treatment towards the end was one of the reasons I didn't like the film at that much.
Yeah, not only like was she a female character that ended up kind of being, I don't know if sacrificed is the right word, but treated like her worth was only to advance a man's goals.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing.
And then also the droid rebellion that she started was a distraction. So it didn't, although she wanted it to happen and she almost did it, like, it didn't have as much meaning in it because we didn't get to see her struggle from her perspective. We didn't get to see how bad things are. We didn't get all of that context. And honestly, if you're going to create a character like that is going to have a Spartacus moment, you should give them, show us, not tell us, show us their struggle of being a slave from their perspective through their eyes. And it will mean something to the audience. If those are the stories you're trying to tell, you have to get us emotionally connected with these robots.
And I feel like they were on the start of doing that in Solo. I felt like,
but it fell flat.
They didn't like explore deep enough. They didn't really, that moment between Kira and L3, essentially they started talking about guys.
Yeah, it's essentially they started talking about guys is right. And, like from a Bechdel perspective, I mean, nothing passes the Bechdel test any longer, but it was one of those moments. Yeah.
Was so infuriating, honestly, like while I was watching the film. Like I felt like, again, and this is what so many other people felt at the same time, there was such great promise with this character, like with how she started out and what like she was going to do, but again, it just like it almost became like a joke, honestly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like, I feel like the writers did not do her justice.
It's hard for me to separate view I have of L3 from Last Shot and how she ended up playing out in Solo. I really loved Last Shot. I'm looking forward to reading the Solo novelization. I just haven't gotten around to it by Mur Lafferty. I hope it does play out better, to your point, after getting to speak to her. But we can tell what the storytellers are trying to say. They're trying to say these things are important. They're putting story focus on them, and they're repeating these themes of droid rights, droid manumission. We got, although not a canon specific story in The Legends of Luke Skywalker, we do get a droid revolution in iDroid too. So why tell these specific stories at this time, Swara? Why is this important to, politically or socially to tell these stories, even though they're not doing them maybe entirely correctly? They're trying.
Well, it's like we're talking about the notion of rights so much in our current politics, like here in the US and Canada, I'm sure, and all over the world, about how minority populations or marginalized populations do not have their full access to rights, who, give and serve to our economies, but are not given their due. So the droids are a metaphor for that, essentially. And it's like, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, of course.
No.
Nothing is or should be, but is meant to give us like these sort of thoughts on, again, these general issues.
But is it almost superficial to do it as a droid versus, maybe something organic? I know that Clone Wars has told anti-slavery storylines before, where they've had slave revolts, especially, kind of in that Clone Wars cartoon. They had an entire arc about, rescuing slaves and dealing with Anakin's slave history, etc. But would it be better if they were dealing with organics versus droids? Or is there something about using droids that helps tell these stories?
It's difficult to say. I feel like because droids are the most obvious, and the thing is that Star Wars universe does not have the same racial implication, as in like in universe.
In universe, yeah.
Yeah, it does not have the same racial dynamics that we have in the same world. So I think the droids are meant to be that sort of metaphor for a society that, ironically, is in a galaxy far, far away that has advanced more than we have as a human.
Yeah, they have specifically had these advantages with these droids that do it's almost like if automation actually ends up doing what it's promised to do, what kind of society do you end up having, but I think these stories are still important, and I don't know that they would be telling them if they didn't feel like they needed to be told or to tell us something about, back to the Harry Potter notion that it's how you treat your lowest person in your organization or in your society that really defines your character. And good protagonists, Anakin when he's still a protagonist, Rey, Luke, all treat droids with this base amount of respect and treat them like they are people and are reticent to, take away the things that make them them. What's really fascinating actually in the turn from in Revenge of the Sith is that Anakin starts to not treat R2 very respectfully as he starts to slide to the dark side. So there could be something that they're saying there too.
Are you talking about in Clone Wars specifically?
Like in Revenge of the Sith, there is a turn where he doesn't treat R2 as respectfully when he goes to Mustafar. Like he doesn't treat him like he used to. He used to give him a mission. Instead, he's like, just stay with the ship.
Right, that is true, yeah.
Right? He loses that humanity. He loses the humanity in the conversation with him and R2.
Yeah, that's totally true. It's like he, the things that like initially drew him to be such a good person, that sort of empathy he had with the droids from his own experience being a slave himself. Mm-hmm. He wasn't applying that any longer and slipped to the dark side, which is extremely unfortunate. And I really do feel, it's interesting with Anakin. He's always, I feel like, jibed most with droids generally. I feel like, he has like, actually, I don't think we have anything on the canon record of him really having any friends, like other than Obi-Wan while he's an apprentice. I feel like, when he was at the Jedi Temple, he must have been very socially isolated.
Yeah.
Just thinking about Padme every day.
Yeah, exactly.
But I could very much imagine a headcanon in which he was, hanging with the droids, or like the droids were his only friends. And that's, the only sort of relationship he had. He'd never had any real nurturing from the Jedi Council, maybe only from Obi-Wan, but even that wasn't enough, as we've clearly seen.
It was limited, probably.
It was very limited, but the droids, even before R2, I'm sure droids in the Jedi Temple, he must have gone along with really well, so that's kind of sad.
Well, and he was always tinkering in his room because they've shown in Clone Wars when he was actually in his room, like he had all of this stuff that he was working on from a technology perspective. That was just who Anakin was. He was always fixing things. Really actually makes me feel bad for battle droids, especially because droids eventually become, you know, self-aware and they understand their situation, their lot in life. And every time that a battle droid says, "Oh no," I'm like, oh no, like he's realized his place in the universe, and then he gets destroyed by a lightsaber.
Yeah, totally. It's like he, you know, with the droids generally, like during the Clone Wars, it's almost maybe he also lost some of his affection for them during the Clone Wars. So
yeah,
through war, like, you know, just like the Republic changed into the Empire, you know, we have that parallel with Anakin turning into Darth Vader, like during the Clone Wars, and he is increasingly losing like his own humanity, his own empathy, his own compassion for droids, which is, again, really sad.
They are sentient, yeah. And I would like to understand more. You know, I want more stories from a droid perspective. You talked about seeing like a droid rebellion or something on screen before, but what would your ideal like story next for droids be?
Honestly, you know, I was like my ideal story was what they started out with L3 doing. But I feel like they kind of failed spectacularly on that. So I would love to have like a group of droids traveling on their own. Actually, have you read the C-3PO comic about how he gets a red arm?
Yes.
Yeah, it's such a good story. I would love something like that, like C-3PO with a group of droids exploring a planet or maybe traveling the galaxy, looking for their purpose, or maybe like something with IG-88. There's something, honestly, the only sort of story I want is an individual droid or a couple of droids, you know, just them being the, you know, like main characters. I think whatever like they could do with that and maybe explore more about droid sentience and more droid rights,
society and like how they communicate with each other.
Droid society, exactly.
Yeah. In Legends of Luke Skywalker, there's a droid story called iDroid, and it focuses on a droid called Zeta. I have a myriad amount of reasons why I think that this is not a canon story, quote unquote. It's more like an analogy for the saga, but like Zeta does artwork. She has friends, like they have a community. These droids, they do fulfilling work, and yeah, they are like servants of organics, but they have fulfillment and bliss within their own little place in the galaxy and in the universe. And then she's taken from that and becomes a slave and an enforcer of other people's will, with being restrained and being manipulated to be basically a guard droid. And the fascinating thing is throughout that whole play, the parallels to Dark Force users and how they end up becoming either redeemed or turning to the dark side anyways, you know? It's a really great story. I highly recommend it. But it also gives you a really good internal perspective on how good droid stories could be if told correctly. Using great actors like Alan Tudyk creates a sympathetic droid.
Yeah, totally. Like, again, Alan Tudyk's K2SO, there's a reason he resonates with so many people and why some people actually consider him the best droid. I mean, he's also like, you know, C-3PO, you know, as much as we love him, he is also like a bit divisive in like how people consider him annoying versus how many consider him lovable. But I think for the most part, people really love K2SO. He's had a much warmer response.
Yeah, I would say people resonated with K2SO a little bit more. And I find that a lot of people just identify with how socially awkward C-3PO is.
Like, I probably identified with him like that when I was a kid, for sure.
Yeah, I recorded an episode with Amy Wishman-Naylan, and her favorite droid is C-3PO, and we talked all about.
Oh yeah, I know. Amy loves 3PO. Yeah,
and she really helped me see from his perspective. Like, his goal is just to do what he was programmed for in the best possible way. He's a protocol droid. He wants to do his job, and it's like this Star Wars keeps on getting in the way of him doing his job, which is planning events and making sure everything is perfect and that everybody is comfortable and that everybody has everything that they need. And if he could just go back to doing that, he would end up following his bliss and be very happy and ideal to deal with in a very Campbellian sort of way. His own hero's journey is just to plan big events. He's like a wedding planner that is stuck up in the Star Wars being a spy in the sequel trilogy. He's like a spy master in the sequel trilogy. Poor guy.
Oh my God. If they just gave 3PO his own choice of job, and that's actually an interesting larger question for droids generally, if they had their own real choice of job. So, but at the same time, I feel like we've seen examples of this playing out. For example, IG-88 wanting to become a bounty hunter. Mm-hmm. There's these specific droids here and there that, again, due to their layer of programming, have this ability to choose what they want to do with their lives. That's fascinating.
I think once we have more opportunity to have more stories, we will get some of that. But I hope to turn it back to what we were originally talking about with the Resistance, I hope we get some cool BB-8 background. I hope we understand a little bit about Bucket's background, because this is the canon of the day, what we're experiencing. And I have this dream, Swara, that R2-D2, who was originally Padme's droid for over 10 years, and I hope we get a good play of that in Queen's Shadow. I hope that R2-D2 has an opportunity to talk to Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, about his history and his past, and to set him straight, because R2 has remembered everything. Be like, look, boy, I've seen this before. It didn't end well for the person involved. Maybe you could choose a different path. Make that knowledge that he contains worthwhile.
Right, exactly. That would be really fascinating if we explored more of that.
Yeah. So, Swara, what are you hoping from storytelling in the future for droids or anything? Because it seems like these are social issues that they are attempting to poke at a little bit, but not maybe succeeding. What are your hopes for the future?
I just really hope we get a full exploration of droids' rights, as a political issue, as going along with some individual droids or a group of droids. I think that would be really cool. I think that we just need to see more from the droid perspective generally. And it's I don't want Clone Wars or Rebels episodes of. I've only really enjoyed one or two of them, to be honest. I love droids, but not so much the droid episodes in the cartoon series. I hope that they can do those better in Resistance, honestly. I hope that the droids aren't simply treated like a very kiddish joke. I mean, these are for kids, these are for kids generally anyway, but I think that kids can understand the level of complexity of droids in Star Wars and what they go through. So I really hope that they explore that more.
Yeah, and I think that kids tend to identify with R2-D2 or C-3PO the most because they see themselves as feeling powerless, always being ordered around, maybe not always having a say in what's happening. And that's a powerful thing to show and represent through a character's eyes if they want to connect with children in Resistance.
Yeah, exactly. They are essentially a conduit for the audience. That's what they were intended as from the very start of Star Wars. So hopefully they can get back more to that root and really incorporate. I think, honestly, even though I give it crap here and there, I do think that Rebels did do some good job of exploring this with both Chopper and AP5 episode. There were some good elements in the relationship between AP5 and Chopper. I think especially in their first meeting, I felt wow, this is really deep. There was some really great stuff in here, but didn't go far enough in my opinion. So I really hope it just does in the future.
Yeah, they ended up slipping into a C-3PO R2-D2 type relationship very quickly, which we've already seen, and we didn't necessarily need more of that from a storytelling perspective, but I have hope that, there's lots of stories still to tell. I just maybe am not as patient with the storytelling group as I need to be, because I know that storytelling takes time. So that's on me to try to be more patient with these stories. So I think that that's a really great look at droid rights, where they currently stand, what we hope for them in the future, as well as kind of the topic of manumission and some of the more complex questions that droids in the Star Wars universe have raised. And I don't know that we've answered them, because I think that it's up to the storytellers to answer them in universe.
Agreed. There's so much for them to explore. Yeah.
Which is okay. So thank you, Swara, for coming on the show and giving us your insight. I look forward to any opportunity I get in the future to talk to you, because you're so smart and you get it, which is great.
Aw, thank you.
Did you want to remind people where they can find you real quick?
Yeah. So, yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Swarseawalker. That's SWARZSEAWALKER. You can find my podcast, Beltway Banthas, wherever you get your podcast. The same for the Flash podcast. And you can check out some of my blogs on the But Why Though podcast blog. I most recently had a piece come out about the upcoming live action Aladdin and my feelings on the representation issues of the film. So it was very cathartic, and I really hope you check it out. It's basically, the title is My Very Complicated Feelings on the Upcoming Live Action Aladdin. So please check that out. And check out the hashtag SWRepMatters on Twitter for that advocates for diversity and inclusion in Star Wars universe.
Awesome. I am Marie-Claire Gould. Personal Twitter is Marie Gould on Twitter. The show is What the Force. We're at whattheforce.ca. We're on Twitter at WT4 Show. You can find us on iTunes and most podcatchers. Feel free to subscribe or track us down. And if you want to talk about Star Wars, we're on, reach out to us and start a conversation. Cheers.